Hey everybody. So as I'm digging through the work that you've been turning in over the past couple of weeks, I want to make an interesting point that we're in one of the more difficult parts of the semester, particularly when we're talking about things such as privilege and disadvantage and the idea of refugees. Especially this semester, things with refugees and immigrants because of the executive order have gotten quite a bit more complex and frankly a lot more interesting because it's raised a lot of really interesting and poignant questions about what our responsibility in the world is, which relates very directly to that idea of thinking globally and acting locally. But I want to take a step back and look back at the Kirk and Okazawa Ray article from a few weeks ago that talks about those different social identities and the idea of social location where all those identities overlap. And we have that list on there of the dominant and subordinate categories. And I wanted to take a little bit of time to clarify a few things. First off, every once in a while people get kind of fired up, and particularly women or people of color who are looking at some of these categories and seeing that word subordinate and going, I am not subordinate to anyone, so don't you even say that, don't you even mess with me, right? And that is true. However, at the same time, we're not looking at it as at an individual basis here. And that's another important point to take into account, is that dominant doesn't necessarily mean good, subordinate doesn't necessarily mean bad. It's just a way of describing power structures in the way that the society is organized. And it was summed up really nicely by one of the students in the discussion board, where it said the dominant group has the greatest influence in determining the structure of society. So while it doesn't mean that every single white person is powerful or has had a great life, and it doesn't mean that every male is powerful and has had a great life. It just means that white people in general in this society have had certain advantages in shaping institutions and determining the structure of society, just like men have had similar advantages. And as a result, people of color and women and disabled people have had disadvantages. There's a lot of white men in particular who get pretty fired up by this article. And as you can see in the video right here, I am a white man. And this article doesn't fire me up in the same way. Like, I don't feel attacked by the article. I feel like it's a description of how society has been structured, that white people have certain advantages over people of color in general. It doesn't mean that somebody hasn't had a hard life. It just means that maybe it hasn't been quite as hard. I think a really good point to take into account is that a lot of people, particularly white men, will say, well, I've had a really hard life, and we couldn't put food on the table sometimes, and my family really struggled and everything like that. And it's interesting to me to see, okay, we went from a discussion right there about race and gender directly into a discussion about class, right? So if we're talking about not being able to put food on the table, what we're really talking about is money and that socioeconomic class level. And so it's easy to kind of get distracted because there is still racism in this society, and there's still a big discussion about it, and there's still people who are fired up about it, and some people who are in the subordinate categories don't do the best job of trying to articulate what they would like to see for equality. And then there are people in the dominant categories who just kind of won't listen or feel attacked, and then you put up that wall and you get defensive about things. And I don't think either of those things, right, the attacking and then the getting defensive, neither of them help to solve the problem. And so what I ask people to do, particularly white men in the class, is to try to take a step back. I was writing about this the other day. For me personally, what I'm trying to do is to listen, right? As an able-bodied person, I am trying to listen more to people who are disabled about the challenges that they face. As a Christian person, I am trying to listen to people of other religions to hear about the challenges that they've faced, because they are challenges that I have not faced in this society, right? I try to talk to people of color about, what challenges have you faced in your life that I haven't had to face, and just to sit back and listen and let their experience be what it is, and to take it into account, as opposed to getting defensive and trying to deny that person's experience. And I think that's a really important thing to do. And so I'm going to stop right there with that point. I'm going to have a couple of videos this week to touch on some really important things, because in this particular discussion, things can get out of hand pretty fast if there's misunderstandings, or if people say things that are perceived to be fairly strong, that if we were in a face-to-face class, we could address it and we could ask questions in that moment. But what happens in an online class is somebody gets an idea, it goes up on the discussion board, I don't read it till a week later, I can't address it, somebody on the discussion addresses it, but maybe not in the most tactful way, and then disagreements and distrust can start to happen, and we need to be really, really careful about trying to add to the level of trust with each other, and to back all of our assertions, all of our generalizations with textual support, whether that's text that I've provided or text that you've read on your own. Okay, so keep that in mind. We want to continue to try to back up everything that we say with text, with proof, as opposed to just making sweeping generalizations. So that's it for this video, and I'm going to head into creating another one immediately after this. Talk to you soon.